Imagine drifting into a deep, peaceful sleep on a small wooden boat gently rocking on the calm river. The soothing rustle of leaves and the quiet lapping of water against the hull lull you into a false sense of security. The darkness around you feels serene, hiding nothing more than the sounds of nature, or so you think. But then everything changes. You're suddenly ripped from your slumber by a searing pain, claws raking across your face, tearing through skin and muscle. A Bengal tiger has set its sights on you, and you're at its mercy in the middle of an unforgiving river. This was Hasmot Ali's nightmare, as a sudden, brutal attack by a tiger in the Sunbarans forced him to fight not just for his survival, but for the very face he once knew. What followed was an ordeal that would change him forever. It was a humid evening in rural Bangladesh as dusk settled over the small village where Hasmot Ali had spent most of his life. The quiet night was alive with the soft hum of insects and the distant calls of animals echoing from the nearby Sunbarans forest. The forest, dense and foreboding, was home to countless creatures, but none were more feared than the Bengal tiger. Known for its unmatched power and lethal strength, the tiger commanded both reverence and fear. In Ali's village, stories of tiger attacks circulated often. While some dismissed these tales as exaggerations or rare occurrences, the villagers knew to remain cautious. They lived at the edge of a wilderness ruled by this apex predator. Hasmot Ali had spent all of his 40 years in this village, leading to a solitary life apart from the other villagers. The reasons for his isolation traced back 20 years to a night he could never forget. At 18, Ali had been responsible for providing for himself and his family. With few job options available, he turned to fishing and foraging, a tough but rewarding way to make a living. While he was familiar with the challenges of fishing, foraging for honey presented an entirely different ordeal. The bees, relentless in defending their hives, often left him covered in stings, yet it was a livelihood he endured without complaint. One evening, Ali set out on a multi-day fishing trip. Alongside a small group of local fishermen, he pushed his weathered boat off the shore and guided it carefully through the familiar twists and turns of the river. The boat, his trusted companion on countless journeys, creaked softly under the weight of the day's catch. Hours passed as they worked the waters, catching just enough to sustain their business. Ali even managed to gather honey from a hive near the riverbank, a valuable addition to their haul. By nightfall, exhaustion weighed heavily on him, and as darkness cloaked the river, he lay down on the boat's worn wooden boards to sleep off his fatigue. But as he drifted off, an unseen presence lingered nearby. Ali was not alone. From the underbrush near the water's edge, two gleaming eyes watched him, silent and calculating. A Bengal tiger crouched in the shadows, its muscular body tensed as it observed the lone figure on the boat. Shrouded by the cover of night, the tiger slipped into the water, gliding almost soundlessly toward the unsuspecting fisherman. The river concealed its approach, its golden eyes locked on Ali, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Ali's rest was shattered by a sudden, searing pain. The tiger leaped onto the boat, its claws raking across his face with brutal precision, slicing through skin and muscle. Before he could react, the pain surged sharp and intense through his body. His hands flew to his face, the wet warmth of blood soaking his fingers as they traced the deep gashes where flesh had been torn away. The attack was swift and merciless. The tiger's weight pinned Ali down, its claws tearing at his clothing as it tried to drag him overboard with each savage tug. Ali fought back, but his limbs felt heavy, his vision blurring as waves of pain overwhelmed him. The blood streamed from the wounds on his face, soaking through his shirt as the tiger's grip tightened. The once quiet night had erupted into chaos, with Ali's muffled gasps the only sound piercing the darkness. The commotion drew the attention of his crew, resting in another boat nearby. They rushed over only to be confronted by a nightmarish scene. Ali lay half slumped in the boat, his hands pressed against his torn face while the tiger's powerful form loomed over him. Blood stained the wooden planks and the air was thick with a metallic scent. The crew shouted, their voices echoing across the water as they frantically tried to make noise, desperate to drive the tiger away. The tiger hesitated, its ears flicking backward in agitation at the sudden uproar. In a sudden burst of fury, the crew began slapping the sides of the boat with their oars, creating a cacophony that startled the predator. The tiger loosened its grip on Ali's clothing and, with a final growl, vanished into the night. The river fell silent once more. The only sounds, the gentle lapping of water and Ali's shallow, labored breaths. Ali's injuries were beyond devastating. The tiger's claws had left his face brutally mangled, with deep, jagged wounds tearing through flesh and bone, a grim testament to the unforgiving force of nature. His co-workers, desperate to save him, rushed him to the nearest hospital. The wooden boat creaked under the strain of their frantic paddling as they raced against time. Once there, Ali was brought to a small clinic where a doctor worked tirelessly under the dim light of an oil lamp, fighting to keep him alive. The doctor labored for hours to stop the bleeding and close the wounds, stitching his torn flesh together as best as he could. Miraculously, Ali survived, but the attack left him with deep physical and emotional scars that would shape the rest of his life. After the attack, Ali withdrew from the outside world, spending most of his time at his home. He felt a deep sense of shame in the presence of his family and friends, fearing his appearance brought them embarrassment. When he ventured out, he hid his face behind a cloth, avoiding the judgmental eyes of strangers. Despite his hardships, Ali's determination never wavered. Over the years, he saved every penny he could to afford reconstructive surgeries. While the procedures couldn't fully restore his face, they brought him closer to a sense of normalcy. For the first time in decades, he was able to show his face without hesitation, finally shedding the cloth that had hidden him for so long. His scars, though still visible, stood as a powerful reminder of his resilience and the strength it took to move forward. Ali's story is one of profound suffering and remarkable perseverance. It also highlights the raw power of nature. The tiger, acting purely on instinct, saw Ali as prey. That day became a stark reminder of the fragile boundary between human life and the natural world. While Ali's journey of survival left a lasting impact, miles away another tragedy was looming, this time in captivity, where Samantha Kudway, a devoted zookeeper, would face her own harrowing encounter with a predator. Samantha Kudway was an extraordinary figure in the world of wildlife conservation. At 43 years old, she had dedicated over 2 decades to her passion as a zookeeper and had become one of the foremost experts in captive breeding programs for endangered species. For much of her career, she worked at Hamilton Zoo in New Zealand, where she served as head curator. This role allowed her to lead groundbreaking efforts to preserve rare animals, including Sumatran tigers, whose survival depended on breeding programs like the one she championed. Among Hamilton Zoo's most remarkable residents was Oz, a majestic Sumatran tiger who had a special place in Samantha's heart. Under her care, Oz had fathered 2 cubs, a monumental achievement for the species' conservation. Calm yet commanding, Oz embodied the zoo's success, and Samantha saw him as key to their future plans for saving his kind from extinction. Her bond with the tiger reflected her unwavering dedication to her work and her love for the natural world. In September 2015, Hamilton Zoo welcomed a delegation from Melbourne, Australia, who had come to observe the zoo's management of large carnivores and their renowned breeding programs. As head curator, Samantha took great pride in showcasing the team's accomplishments. On the morning of their visit, she arrived early to prepare for the day's tasks. From feeding routines to enclosure checks, Samantha moved through her duties with focus and care. But despite the promising start, an unsettling energy hung in the air, particularly near Oz's enclosure. Oz had been restless for weeks, his agitation fueled by the scent of a female tiger in the neighboring enclosure. As mating season began, the powerful tiger paced his den, his golden fur catching the morning sunlight and low growls rumbling as a warning to all nearby. Samantha, with over 2 decades of experience, recognized the signs of heightened aggression during this time. Still, she wasn't concerned. She had handled Oz countless times before and trusted her instincts. At Hamilton Zoo, the safety of staff and animals was a top priority, with each enclosure designed to minimize risk. The large carnivores were housed in multi-sectioned areas, a secure den for nighttime, a feeding area, and a spacious exhibit filled with plants, sand pits, and enrichment tools like branches and toys. Heavy-duty snap-lock gates separated each section, ensuring that animals couldn't access areas being cleaned or prepared. These gates had never failed before, but on this day they would. That morning, the team had already completed most of their rounds, moving the carnivores into their feeding spaces while readying the main enclosures. Samantha, as usual, was busy tending to the animals, moving methodically through her routine. After checking on the red pandas, she entered the feeding area of Oz's enclosure to ensure everything was ready for the day. Oz, confined to the night part of his enclosure, was unsettled by the scent of a nearby female tiger in heat. He paced relentlessly within the small space, his sharp eyes occasionally darting toward the gate that separated him from the feeding area where Samantha worked. Samantha wasn't fazed. This wasn't her first time working with a tense big cat during mating season. She trusted her experience and calmly continued her tasks. As Samantha worked in the feeding area, a small but critical oversight was unfolding. The gate separating Oz's night part from the feeding area had a subtle misalignment, an issue she'd noticed before but hadn't yet had time to fix. She assumed it was secure, as it had been countless times before. But as she turned to adjust her wheelbarrow, the heavy gate swung open slightly, its mechanism failing to snap shut. Focused on her tasks, Samantha didn't see the shift. To most, the slight movement might have seemed like nothing, but to Oz it was everything. His heightened senses, already on edge from the female's scent, immediately picked up on the shift. The tiger froze in his den, his sharp eyes locking on the open gate. What had been a routine morning for Samantha was now spiraling into something far more dangerous, and she hadn't yet realized the critical mistake. By the time Samantha realized what had happened, it was too late. Oz had already stepped into the feeding area, moving silently from his den through the now open gate. His powerful muscles rippled with each calculated step, his instincts driving him forward. Samantha turned, but her years of experience and quick reflexes were no match for the tiger's raw speed and instinct. The predator was free, and the carefully controlled safety of the enclosure had just been shattered. Samantha spun around just as the tiger lunged. Oz closed the distance in 4 powerful strides, his massive paws hitting the ground with a deafening thud. There was no time to react. Before she could move, the tiger was already upon her. Oz struck with force, his body slammed into hers, sending her crashing to the ground. She struggled to regain her balance, but it was useless. The tiger's strength overwhelmed her as his claws sank into her shoulders and his weight pinned her to the earth. Blood rushed to her head as she tried to push against him, but his jaws were already closing around her neck, the pressure so intense as her skin tore. The world spun violently as the tiger's grip tightened as she gasped for air, but it was gone. The wheelbarrow, which had been tipped over beside them, lay forgotten. The peaceful morning had now taken a dark turn. The ground beneath her was soaked with blood. The tiger's grip was unrelenting, and with one final brutal shake of his head, he snapped her neck. Oz stepped back, his eyes still fixed on her. He wasn't hungry, he wasn't even particularly interested in the body, but the danger had passed. The female tiger was no longer a threat, and Samantha, in his eyes, had been nothing more than a distraction. The tiger paced around the enclosure, unsure of what to do next. His hormones had subsided, and now all that was left was confusion. The scene was horrific. When the zookeepers arrived, the sight was one they would never forget. Oz was covered in blood, his stripes barely visible under the dark red. Samantha's lifeless body lay in a pool of blood beside the overturned wheelbarrow, the aftermath of the attack still fresh and vivid. Her throat had been ripped out, her body mangled from the force of the attack. It was clear to the keepers that there had been no chance to save her. The visitors from Melbourne who had arrived to observe the zoo's work with large cats would be the ones to witness the aftermath of an incident they could never have anticipated. They arrived too late to help, only to see the horrific consequences of a tiger's primal instincts, which no amount of training or experience could have foreseen. The zoo, once a place of wonder, was now shrouded in mourning. Samantha, who had devoted her life to the animals she loved, was gone. Oz was sedated and returned to his enclosure, but the tragedy had left an indelible mark. What began as a routine morning had turned into a nightmare no one would ever forget. Yet, as the zoo grappled with its devastating loss, thousands of miles away in the frozen expanse of Russia's Far East, another story of terror was unfolding. In the remote, snow-covered villages, a predator known only as the Devil stalked its prey with ruthless precision. In these isolated settlements, fear reigned as the predator claimed its victims, leaving a haunting legacy in its wake. It was the 1920s on the Kamchatka Peninsula, a rugged volcanic land stretching into the icy expanse of the Pacific Ocean. This vast wilderness, spanning over 770 miles, was known for its harsh winters, where temperatures could plunge to minus 30 degrees Celsius. But it wasn't just the brutal cold that the people of Kamchatka feared during those dark years. A far more terrifying presence lurked in the shadows, a man-eating Siberian tiger. The terror began one cold afternoon in the village of Kluchi when a young woodsman went out to chop firewood. The sound of his axe striking the trunks of trees carried through the dense forest, drawing the attention of the tiger, which was about 2 miles away. With each swing of the axe, the beast crept closer, its padded paws leaving deep prints in the fresh snow. The woodsman had no idea that his next swing would be his last. As the tiger silently closed the distance, its sharp eyes locked onto him. Then, with a terrifying burst of power, it lunged from the underbrush. The man barely had time to react before the tiger knocked him to the ground, its weight pinning him to the frozen earth. A moment later, the tiger's jaws closed around his neck, crushing his windpipe. The young man went still in the snow, his body dragged into the woods by the beast to be consumed at its leisure. When the man didn't return by nightfall, his wife raised the alarm. Villagers launched a search, fearing the worst. They found his axe by the woodpile, and a trail of blood led them into the forest. Less than 600 feet into the trees, they discovered his body, mauled and dismembered. This was the first of many grisly killings. The Siberian tiger had begun its reign of terror. Over the following months, the tiger's attacks grew more frequent. The villagers of Kamchatka found themselves trapped in a nightmare. The tiger was indiscriminate. Young and old alike fell victim to its hunger. As the death toll climbed, panic spread. No one was safe, not even within the confines of their homes. The tiger began to target people in their beds during the dead of night, slipping through the smallest gaps in doorways or windows to drag them away in the darkness. By the end of the first brutal winter, from October 1923 to April 1924, the tiger had claimed the lives of over 15 people. As the ice melted and spring arrived, the villagers dared to hope the tiger had moved on. With the worst of winter behind them, children ventured outside again, and farmers returned to their fields. Life seemed to return to normal. But it wasn't over. When the next winter descended, the tiger returned, bolder, more relentless than ever. One by one, the villagers became its prey. A young boy disappeared while gathering firewood. A woman was snatched from the well. Fear turned to terror, and the villagers had no choice but to call for help. The army responded with determination, arriving with the goal of ridding the peninsula of this deadly predator. They even brought aircraft to scour the land from above. But still, the tiger eluded them. After a tense search, the soldiers believed they had killed the beast. They posed for photographs with the impressive tiger, which measured over 10 feet long and weighed 330 pounds. The villagers celebrated, but their joy was short-lived. Local hunters weren't convinced the slain tiger was the right one. They had seen the tracks left by the killer and knew the animal's paws were much smaller than those of the elusive predator. The tiger that had killed so many was larger. Its paw prints had measured over 8 inches across. As the cold winds of winter returned in late 1925, the tiger struck again. The villagers, lulled into a false sense of security, were plunged back into fear. The beast's deadly presence continued to haunt them, slipping through the snowy woods with unnerving ease. It killed with ruthless efficiency, leaving behind only mutilated bodies and a trail of footprints. By now, it had mauled over 100 people, a death toll unprecedented for a tiger, setting a grim record never before heard of. The villagers' worst fears were confirmed. The tiger was still out there. But what made this predator even more dangerous wasn't just its size or ferocity. It was its cunning and adaptability. Unlike other tigers, this one seemed to stalk its victims with calculated precision, as though compensating for a hidden weakness. One of its tracks revealed a strange detail. One of the tiger's paws was less indented than the others, suggesting that the beast had suffered an injury. It walked with an uneven gait, possibly due to a wound or a congenital defect. This injury might explain its deadly behavior. When a predator can no longer hunt its usual prey, it turns to easier targets. In this case, the people of Kamchatka, with their slower, weaker bodies, became easy prey for the wounded tiger. Yet, as the months passed, the attacks began to dwindle. The once relentless predator seemed to retreat into the wilderness, and fewer villagers reported sightings or attacks. Perhaps its injuries had finally caught up to it, forcing it to slow down, or perhaps it had found a more secluded hunting ground. Still, no one could feel truly safe, and the tiger's shadow continued to loom over the villages. The next few winters passed without further attacks, and by 1926, people began to hope the tiger had simply moved on. Yet no one knows what truly happened to it. Perhaps it succumbed to its injuries or sought new hunting grounds, though this seemed unlikely for an apex predator in a rich territory. Some believed it was no ordinary tiger, but a creature of darkness that vanished once its purpose was fulfilled. Whatever the truth, its legend lingered, haunting those who remembered its reign of terror. But terror isn't confined to the wild. In a zoo in Bahawalpur, Pakistan, a young man would soon face his own nightmare, not as someone venturing into the predator's territory, but as an ordinary individual caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Behind the safety of bars meant to protect, a predator was lying in wait, and the consequences would be no less than devastating. It was a quiet morning at Bahawalpur Zoological Gardens on December 6, 2023, as the zoo's cleaning staff began their usual rounds. The first rays of sunlight cast a soft glow over the sprawling 25-acre grounds, highlighting the tranquil scenery. Birds chirped in the distance, a lion's growl rumbled faintly, and the occasional hiss of a snake cut through the air. The staff moved along the perimeter fence, preparing to clean the tiger enclosure's indoor dens. But as they approached the enclosure, something felt off. The 3 Bengal tigers lounged at the back of their pen, seemingly calm. Then one of them moved. Slowly, its head turned, revealing something clamped in its powerful jaws, a shoe. The worn, dirty shoe dangled precariously, its frayed edges swaying as the tiger shifted. At first, the staff thought it might have been tossed in by a visitor, but the unsettling sight quickly hinted at something far more sinister. Uneasy but determined to complete their work, the cleaners continued along the fence, scanning for other clues. As they ventured further, their eyes widened in horror. Lying half hidden in the mud and shadows was a motionless body, face down and lifeless. The man's legs were severely mauled, his clothes torn to shreds, and his skin was pale, drained of life. With every step closer, the grim reality of the situation became clearer. This man was dead, and the tigers had been involved. The cleaners immediately called emergency services, and the zoo was quickly locked down. Staff realized they were facing something far worse than a misplaced shoe. Authorities arrived and began their investigation. What initially appeared to be a tragic accident soon spiraled into a deeper and more complicated mystery. The body was identified as 28-year-old Mohammed Bilal from Greentown in Lahore. Investigators believed he had died the night before. His father, Dr. Muhammad Javed, was informed of the tragedy and began his journey to Bahawalpur, a grueling 250-mile drive. The tigers were moved to a secure area as authorities scoured the scene for evidence. Muhammad's injuries, particularly the extensive damage to his legs, were consistent with a tiger attack, and investigators concluded that he had likely died from blood loss. However, the media quickly latched onto the story, speculating about Muhammad's motives. Rumors painted him as a troubled individual with a history of conflicts with law enforcement. Some reports labeled him reckless or even suicidal, suggesting he had entered the enclosure on purpose. The zoo's narrative added fuel to this theory, claiming that Muhammad had breached their perimeter, scaled an exterior wall, and jumped into the tiger enclosure from the roof. But not everything added up. Investigators examined the zoo's CCTV footage but found no evidence of Muhammad entering the premises that night. There were no signs of him climbing walls or slipping through gates. His presence remained a mystery. How had he gotten into the zoo after hours? Why was he there at all? The zoo insisted Muhammad was an intruder who had deliberately put himself in harm's way. But as investigators dug deeper, troubling new details emerged. It turned out that Muhammad had been involved in an altercation with one of the zoo wardens earlier that day. Some believed this was why the zoo staff were so quick to label him unstable and reckless, pushing a narrative that conveniently absolved them of blame. Meanwhile, Muhammad's father adamantly denied the rumors surrounding his son. He described Muhammad as a bright and law-abiding man, dismissing any claims of drug use or erratic behavior. Further investigation suggested that Muhammad's presence on the tiger house roof may not have been intentional. Evidence pointed to the possibility that he slipped and fell, landing heavily inside the enclosure. The fall didn't kill him, but it didn't go unnoticed by the tigers. Instinct took over as they circled their prey. Each time Muhammad tried to stand, powerful swipes from their claws knocked him back down. One tiger clamped its jaws around his leg while the others attacked in unison, their bites tearing through flesh with ease. Muhammad likely fought for his life, kicking and screaming, but his cries went unheard as the zoo was closed for the night. Despite the horrific attack, one peculiar detail stood out. The tigers didn't devour his body. Instead, they left it where he had fallen, as if satisfied that the threat was neutralized. Investigators confirmed that Muhammad had been alive when he entered the enclosure, but by the time the tigers retreated, he had succumbed to his injuries. The commissioner of Bahawalpur formed a 5-member fact-finding committee to examine the incident. Their goal was to uncover how Muhammad ended up in the enclosure, assess any failures in zoo security, and determine whether the zoo could have prevented the tragedy. As they climbed onto the tiger house roof to gather evidence, questions remained unanswered. Was this truly a tragic accident, or was there more to the story? Despite lingering questions, Muhammad's parents chose not to file a lawsuit against the zoo. The full truth of what happened that night may never come to light. Muhammad Bilal's death remains a haunting mystery, a reminder of the deadly potential of human encounters with predators, even those behind bars. Thank you for joining us through these harrowing encounters with nature's most dangerous predators. Ready for more? Discover the chilling story of Diana Hansen, a 24-year-old intern living her dream at a big cat park, until one tragic, unpredictable moment turned her connection to the lions she loved into a deadly encounter. Click to uncover the mystery behind her untimely death.